Good evening, all, and welcome to today's meeting of the Economy, Place, Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to colleagues around the table. Our guests will be speaking on items, and of course the thousands upon thousands watching from home. Jokes aside, there will be a few watching from home who are very much appreciated. We've got an interesting agenda tonight, two items, but very meaty ones. So I trust we'll have useful discussions. But working through the agenda, I have apologies tonight from Councillor Ben Burton, who is subbed by Councillor Rachel Melly. Welcome to the party, Councillor Melly. It's good to have you here. Any declarations of interest from colleagues not otherwise declared? Councillor Merritt?
Yes, in terms of item 4.5 on the garden waste collections, if we move towards discussing fee levels and any recommendations on that, I'd obviously need to declare a financial interest as someone who participates in the scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt. In which case, I too will declare that interest. I mean, there's nods. I don't. Do we need to cover every? I'm not going to ask every single person. But look, the point's made. Thanks, Councillor Merritt. Any others? Councillor Hook.
I think the community warden thing or whatever it is says about snow wardens and things. Well, I'm a snow warden and something a litter picker apparently. Not that I've done much of it, but I've got the kit and the gloves.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Well, with that in mind, I too am a snow warden. Is it? We're not. It's not financial. That's a good point. Right, back on track. I'll move to the minutes from the previous meeting, which was back in December. Seems like an age away. Do any colleagues have comments, amendments on those minutes? Councillor Merritt.
Yes, Chair. I'm happy with the minutes, but I do have a matter arising. We did ask for some additional information on the in the item on page 1314 on the finance and performance monitor, and there was a set of resolves at the end. We did have information back at the following meeting from Patrick on on some of the items, but we are still outstanding the information about the actual bus performance figures, and I would like to chase on that. We're still working from 2022 figures. That's not really satisfactory.
Thanks, Councillor Merritt. Yeah, we'll chase that up. Anything else from members? Can we consider those minutes approved pending Councillor Merritt's comment? Thank you. Right, so which brings us to. Sorry, 1 second, colleagues.
I've actually been sent around by you.
Sorry, yeah.
So I was just going to say, Councillor, we did get something back from the business intelligence team, so I'll forward those on to you again, just so you've got them on the bus patronage statistics, which I believe have gone up to 23, 24.
Oh, right. Okay. I'm sorry, I missed that.
So that didn't go to the whole committee then?
I believe it did, but I'll double check. And
okay.
I'll send it round again just to make sure.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. So we'll now move to public participation. We have two speakers tonight. We did have three, but one sent apologies. The first speaker, I should say, they're both doing so remotely. I hope I pronounce their surname correctly. Apologies if I don't. Tracy Ossel, and that's about the Neighbourhood Caretakers item. Tracy, can you hear me? And
can you hear me?
I can. If I pronounced your name incorrectly, please do tell me what it should have been.
No, you pronounced it perfectly well. Thank you very much.
So, well, you have about 3 minutes. I'm not going to be over the top with shutting you down at 3 minutes, but you know, don't push it too far. Yeah,
that's fine. I'll try and be brief for everyone. I'm speaking on behalf of the Groves Association, which I've just been taken on as chair. It's been about this neighbourhood caretaker scrutiny that I'm more interested in. So just quickly go through some things that I found over the past few years to be quite challenging. And if the notes can be made of these, if they want the notes, that's fine, please ask for them. Some of the challenges I had are insufficient support from the council. I found that projects are often delayed and leading often to abandonment of projects in the community, which has been quite sad. I find that a lot of the council colleagues seem to lack a bit of open-mindedness. I don't know why. But it'd be nice to have the country encouraged to open up suggestions for participation, to work with people in the community to get some actually effective communication going and problem solving, rather than just saying, no, is there another thing where we can address this? And in particular, highways and maintenance, I found quite a difficult department to work with on that score. Yeah, the communications issues I've always found very difficult, where we might, for instance, myself personally, have put in for something to be fixed, you hear nothing back, and that can be very frustrating, especially for tenants in the council housing area. I found out that community payback, which I used for a different project, have been absolutely marvellous. But currently, the community payback team are not willing to allow the community payback people into the Groves area, because apparently they've been abused in the past. And I'm sure that is no more worse than abuse, litter picking in a city centre, but that's been a problem. Mentioned about issues getting far too long to get fixed. And it's just so difficult when you're not hearing back and you don't know what's happening, you're constantly having to chase things. Issues with recycling collection. Again, today was a recycling collection in the Groves, and the amount of rubbish that is left by the recycling teams is absolutely horrific. And I'm sure you're all aware of that. But after a litter pick, you find you've got to do another litter pick, and it goes on and on. And another bit of a challenging issue is rubbish left from students and the owner of the HMO properties that are multi-occupancy. I think there's some work that needs to be in collaboration with St John's University on that possibly, but constantly reporting fly tipping around the area, especially when the owners will be doing the houses up or the students are leaving. Again, you're probably fully aware of that, but in 1 week, I had to report 10 incidences in 1 week, and that was just around my little area in the Groves.
About 20 seconds, Tracy.
Oh, right, okay. Positive impact, helpful council employees. We get green bags, collection of waste when we ask, ground maintenance team are great, and a housing officer. And I would like to see, for improvement, a collaborative approach and more walkabouts, which is working with the council and teams on that kind of scope. And I think that covers everything. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tracy. You've covered a hell of a lot of ground there in 3 minutes. Hats off to you. But all of it is useful, and I'm sure will feed into the discussions that we have. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
So the next speaker that we have is Flick Williams, who wants to talk about the general remit of the committee and our work plan. Flick, can you hear us?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. You're well accustomed to this, so fire away when you're ready.
Chair, as your committee has oversight of the planning function, these are some of my concerns. First, we know relevant officers lack inclusive design training. Privately, one said to me, we need all the help we can get. Secondly, much of the guidance says consult at the earliest stages of a project with disabled people. For the Station Gateway scheme, this did not happen. It took disabled activists using the opportunity of the LC Whip steering group to raise concerns about it that finally led to 3 lengthy meetings regarding the front of the station. And even now, owing to cost shortfalls as the scheme is in delivery, we have no idea which of our suggested access improvements will survive the cut. The fundamental problem is this. When schemes go to planning for outline approval, it is always said the detail comes later. Then all of a sudden the detail arrives with no opportunity for input, told too late to make changes as it is now set. And history now seems about to repeat itself with York Central. Conditions regarding access routes to the site amended by delegated decision on 23rd of December that I feel sure were designed to fly completely under the radar. York Central Partners less than transparent at a sister Scrutiny meeting. There are issues that link development on both sides of the station, to which I can get no clear answers, and nor, it seems, can the access officer. I asked at a station gateway meeting, where will rail replacement buses go given the new restricted road space? Officer answer, you're not going to like it, but the current thinking is to suspend the new blue badge parking spaces. Pursuing this, I later got rail replacement buses can pick up at the rear of the station. Well, no, they can't, because there is currently, nor likely to be anytime soon, step-free access at the station rear. The decision notice in December stated against the PSCD, in my opinion, that no one will be unable to make a journey they cannot already. No consideration of additional lengthy, frankly discriminatory journeys for disabled people if rail replacement buses are located here. Because of the lack of both inclusive design training and disability equality training and general ableism and othering of disabled people, I have little confidence in these sorts of issues being readily picked up on. Disabled people, on the other hand, spot them because we are the ones detrimentally affected by them. We are the ones with skin in the game, unlike non-disabled decision makers, and which is why this authority needs to do much better at involving us from the start and stop keeping the access officer at arm's length away from planning. We will always have inaccessibility in our city owing to its historic nature. What we absolutely cannot fail at is achieving an equitable, accessible, inclusive built environment when we are starting with an almost blank canvas with York Central. Thank you.
Thank you, Flick. Very much appreciate your contributions as ever. And as you might already know, I'm not sure, we are looking at work plan and it's very much open to being populated for the year ahead. So I hope we can take on board some of what you're saying at least. Thanks again for joining us. Okay, colleagues, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the first main item of business, which is a review of the garden waste collections since charging has been implemented into the service. So can the relevant officers and executive member join us at the table? You don't all have to come if you don't want to. It's completely up to you, but the more the merrier. We can always call you up if need be. Good evening. So if you want to introduce yourselves, I mean, I think Ben in particular, you're used to how Scrutiny works. We can take the paper as read, but if you want to give a brief overview, and then we'll get into questions, comments from colleagues, and any recommendations to finish.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'll introduce myself. First, I'm Ben Grabham, Head of Environmental Services.
I'm Ian Holt, Head of Fleet and Operations.
Councillor Jenny Kent, Executive Member for the Environment and Climate Emergency.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just in terms of the report, just make a few comments just to support it. Obviously, Executive made the decision to introduce a charge for garden waste collections in January of 2024, and from that, the garden waste subscription scheme was developed. The garden waste service was previously delivered to around 66,000 households across the city. The garden waste service operates from March to December each year. It's a fortnightly collection of garden waste, so all residents receive 20 collections per year over a 40-week season. There were 1,400 households that previously had an additional garden waste bin. That was a charged service that has been in place since 2013. The fee for the garden waste subscription scheme in 2024 was £46.50, which was pro-rated down to £21 because the scheme was introduced with an operational go-live of the 5th of August. And a 50% discount was available for households in receipt of council tax support, which is a specific discount on council tax for eligible residents. A dedicated communications package was developed, and that information pack was sent out to all 66,000 households, which is information on that is included within the report. Additional promotion was undertaken through posters, press and radio advertising, and social media. Probably just want to clarify within the report, in between paragraph 17 and 21 is obviously detailed information on the communications campaign that took place. Just wanted to clarify that when we talk about social media and we use the phrase impressions, those are the number of times that that particular profile or post was displayed via that platform, and reach is the number of people who actually saw that post, so a unique audience for that component. So when we're talking about, or in the report, we're referring to the social media communications, impression and reach mean those things, and that should have been clarified within the report. In total, there were 39,301 subscriptions last year at just over 36,800 households, and 2,167 subscriptions were purchased at the discounted rate. Obviously, as part of the scheme, there were a number of alternative options that were offered to householders in terms of discounted home composters, obviously the ability to share bins. So there were 240 home composters purchased in 2024. I think it's fair to say that there obviously are some reservations when you introduce a new service or a charge for that service. Particularly around fly tipping and the impact on the household waste recycling centres. Within the report, you'll see that obviously reports of fly tipping and incidents of fly tipping of green waste was actually down in 2024 compared to the previous year. And similarly on the household waste recycling centres, there were slightly fewer visits in 2024 to the household waste recycling centres again compared to the previous year. When introducing any new service, I think it's obviously important that you pause and reflect in terms of, things that have gone well, but also improvements that you can make for the future. In terms of lessons learned, whilst obviously additional staff were taken on at the contact centre, some of the call answer rates in July were low, and again, that's referenced within the report. That's been rectified through the recruitment of additional temporary staff for 2025. In terms of the discounts that are available, again, there was some confusion over whether or not people were eligible for certain discounts, and questions were raised around SMI, which is severe mental impairment, which is, again, a particular discount in relation to council tax. So for 2025, the scheme has been slightly expanded so that it covers council tax support and severe mental impairment. So just wanted to make that clarification. And we've also done further work in terms of trying to automate the process, so trying to reduce some of the manual workarounds in the background that the waste operations team actually perform. Obviously, it was the first form that was used on the Granicus platform, which is the new customer relationship management system that the council is moving to. So obviously, there's been some learnings that we've taken forward from that as well. Before taking any questions, I just wanted to acknowledge the tremendous amount of hard work that went into the development and operation of the garden waste subscription scheme. Not only obviously the operational crews that have implemented the collections, but also the teams from waste services, customer and web services, business intelligence, communications and ICT. It really has been a kind of team effort to get the scheme off the ground and implemented in August. I'll obviously update in terms of some of the 2025 performance later on, but if there are any questions about the report, then we'll gladly take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that summary. And for what it's worth, I'd echo the thanks that you've given to officers for their work on implementing it. It's been a big job. I'm sure colleagues will have questions, but one question I'd like to ask just to get us started is, and the paper touches on how some additional bins are being provided to 216 properties. Does the fact that people are now buying into this and basically paying for it potentially offer more flexibility in the future for which properties can get curbside green bins collected? Because I think we've all probably got them in our wards where residents get really annoyed that they can't access the service at the minute, even if they were willing to pay for it. does that free us up from the previous where it was effectively covered by the money the council already had and was perhaps a much tighter ship as a result? Do you see where I'm coming from there?
Yeah, completely see where you're coming from, councillor. Yeah, in relation to obviously the plans for 2025, I suppose there are three main areas, actually four main areas that I'll touch on. So the first is obviously that there are some new housing developments that have never had the garden waste service before, Langley Gate development and parts of Germany Beck, that the service is able to be rolled out to. As part of the wider work that we're doing within the waste service at the moment, there are proposals in place to deliver bags to bins in certain wards. So 6 wards across the city, we're looking at transitioning some households that are currently served with bag collections onto a wheeled bin for their household waste. When that happens and the communication happens to residents, we are looking to develop an online form so that if residents are interested in receiving a garden waste service in the future through a subscription, to let us know, and then we can outline and make that offer available. The third thing obviously is around if there are any areas that you feel within your respective wards that could have the service, or you may have the odd resident, then we will in all likelihood have some capacity to take on those collections. What we don't know, and that's the fourth point, is whether or not there are some households that didn't subscribe last year that may well choose to subscribe this year. So it is very much an unknown that we're dealing with in terms of quantity. So I think it's fair to say that 2025 will be the year whereby hopefully the scheme will settle down and give us a clear idea as to how many subscribers we may have in the future, but it does give us the opportunity to understand what that capacity may be, and then obviously undertake those offers and then look at any optimization work that's required later in the year. So yeah,
Thank you.
There are opportunities.
Total change of subject, and I think that's my questions done before I invite colleagues. It's one for you, Ian. Can you say if the staff on the ground have got any have they had any bother as a result of the charges when it comes to green bins, the loaders out in the cars, not the cars, the vehicles, forgive me.
Yeah, I think they have fielded some questions and frustrations from a minority really of residents, but we did well equip them with answers that they could already give to residents when they're out and about in the, doing the collections to fully support them. But yeah, I don't that there's been a minority of people asking questions, not necessarily directing too much frustration at them, individually or personally. But like I said, we did well equip them with what we expected residents to be asking them of and giving them answers to refer to, and also equipping them with the frequently asked questions and things as well that could hand out.
Great, cool. Thanks for that. I'll open up.
Sorry, Church, if I just add one thing to that, I think, Ian's completely right in everything he said. The additional thing that we tried to do through last year was put an oops sticker onto the bin, which is referenced within paragraph 29 of the report, which was just very much a visual reminder for residents that if they had mislaid the letter and information pack that came through the post, it was just that additional visual reminder that if they wanted to subscribe or they wanted their garden waste bins to be picked up, then they would actually need to subscribe, and we'll be repeating that at the start of the 2025 collection season in March.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just a couple of questions. First, on the testing phase, the report refers to a testing phase prior to the rollout, and I know that around that time there were some kind of mixed messages in terms of when the scheme was starting. I just wondered what lessons you've learned from the testing phase that you've applied for the new collection year. I suppose the second point is around sort of variation in subscription rates by ward, and in particular the lower subscription rates in the more deprived neighbourhoods. So just wondered whether that has played out as you anticipated it would, what thought you've given to additional support that could be provided to households that have chosen not to subscribe. Obviously we the sort of financial impact may be an element in that, but obviously we don't have a lot of data as to why certain eligible households chose not to subscribe. So I wondered if you'd done any, in terms of the lessons learned from the first few months, whether that's something you've given some thought to. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Just in terms of those points, I think obviously the testing phase was incredibly important for us as I suppose as a project board, mainly because we were obviously introducing a new chargeable scheme. It was an online offer as well as an offer through the contact centre in terms of subscribing. And what the testing phase showed was that the technology wasn't quite ready to go live. There were too many parts of that testing phase that could have, I suppose, potentially fallen over with demand, obviously, as it proved to be a kind of very popular scheme. So in terms of the project, the initial plan was to try and go live towards the end of July, and we actually pushed that back by 2 weeks, just to give enough time for that ICT work and the integration between various systems to actually take place. So I suppose in its broadest sense, you've got an integration in quite a few areas. So obviously you've got an online form that needs to point to the back office waste management system, which says whether or not a property is eligible or not. We were hoping that we could obviously do an integration to check against council tax records and council tax systems in relation to discount, but that's not actually been possible as yet, but that is on the future work programme. And then all of that information needs to then obviously go off to the licence provider so that they can obviously issue the licences and the garden waste stickers out to those relevant households that subscribe. So as I mentioned earlier as well, the online form was the very first form that we have used on the new Caretakers platform, which is what's gradually coming in to replace Oracle, which is the council's current provider. So I think there were a lot of learnings for us to take from that from an ICT perspective, and then obviously all of the various integrations that need to happen in relation to that. So that, as I say, that led to the go live date being moved to the 5th of August. In relation to, I suppose offers in relation to the percentage breakdown. That's why we've tried to capture the data on a ward basis so that we can actually understand where the subscriptions are coming from. Some of the information that we don't know as yet is potentially how many households are actually sharing a subscription, but very much the information that we've gleaned from 2024, plus obviously the fact that we've now opened the 2025 scheme, will allow us to build, I think, a coherent picture over where those subscriptions are coming from, and we can actually start to overlay some of that fly tipping data in relation to that as well. We've obviously taken feedback from a number of our kind of public realm teams in terms of where there may or may not be any incidents of fly tipping, to understand if that's localised and to understand whether that correlates in relation to the garden waste subscription numbers. So that's something that we very much are keeping under review, and obviously we'll use the information that's obviously changing minute by minute and hour by hour at the moment in terms of subscriptions to actually review that as we move forward.
Shuffing. It's on the point around sort of bin sharing. Is that when people are subscribing this year, is that a question that you're asking in terms of are you subscribing on behalf of a number of residents? Because particularly with we have CYC housing or housing association housing, where you have a block of apartments where historically there's been a green bin because there was no cost attached, so there didn't need to be a debate amongst the residents as well who's going to pay for it. I know I think some have sort of clubbed together to fund a bin because they like to do some gardening in addition to the work that the council gardeners do. So I was wondering if that was a question you're trying to gather that data through the subscription process this year.
It's not directly in the subscription process for this year. Two options really that I suppose are under consideration at the moment in terms of the project board are whether or not we do a survey towards the end of the year around usage and take up of the scheme, or whether we incorporate that into the sign up process for 2026 scheme. But obviously that's something that is actively under review, but there isn't a definite decision made on that yet.
I've got Councillor Whitcroft next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a few questions about, I guess, the ongoing management of this scheme. We've seen the implementation go through really successfully, just to make sure we can keep that success. So around paragraph 26, talk about the cost of the operational cost of implementing it, 195,000. And the view is that, well, it says in the report you'd envisage comms costs to reduce in 2025 and onwards. That implies, of course, there's still going to be a degree of communications involvement, a degree of publicity around this. Could you just talk us through what form that will take, given that the onus will be lessened now that we've actually launched it? And I do have another question after that, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Councillor Whitcroft. In relation to obviously 2024, start with that first. Obviously, we sent an information pack out to all households in relation to that. As part of the sign-up process, we've obviously asked people to indicate whether or not they're happy to be contacted through email. So as we've transitioned from last year, obviously we issued 66,000 letters and information packs. This year, we've sent out 30,000 emails, because we have a number of residents that have said their preferred method of communication is email. Where we don't have an email address, we obviously sent a hard copy letter to those households. What we will be doing as part of the scheme is obviously following that up in terms of looking at subscription numbers, and then also doing some chasers. So for example, we have 2 email chasers that we're likely to do in February, and 1 letter chaser that we'll do. So we will look at who has subscribed by a particular date, and then obviously remind the residents that they haven't yet subscribed if they want to, and remind them of some of the key dates around when the subscription scheme starts. So in terms of a communications package, we're obviously looking at transitioning as many people onto email communication as we can, because that obviously reduces cost, but recognising that obviously if residents don't have that form, then obviously we'll continue to issue letters. What we've done this year is obviously still gone ahead with advertising through the press and radio advertising, and also various information on social media. So they all come at varying costs. I think it's fair to say that, you know, we will keep under review as a project board the costs in relation to radio and press advertising, and then whether or not that's used as extensively in future years will be something that we obviously reflect upon. But as I say, that's very much the plans in terms of costs. Some of the costs will always remain, so we will have to ensure that there's provision at the contact centre to deal with any calls that come in from residents, either in terms of questions around the Garden Way subscription scheme, or to physically do a subscription if they don't have the means and facility to do it online. So there will obviously be ongoing costs in relation to that. There's ongoing costs in relation to the licence, but very much what we're hoping to do is take sensible decisions in terms of managing that budget as effectively as we can, whilst not affecting the quality of service delivery.
And then just my follow-up, just around a risk management perspective. Obviously, the main way of signifying that you've got this subscription is via the sticker. Would there be any issue around potential forgery, or sort of people causing problems by duplicating the stickers or changing them? And how we're going to make sure we manage that from a risk management perspective?
So there is obviously a risk, and we actually had, I think it was 2 instances last year where we had forged stickers on the bins, but obviously the crews reported those to us. But I suppose from a risk perspective, what we'll do is we'll change the colour of the sticker every year. So obviously all the livery will carry the actual collection year, but the actual colour of the sticker will change. So last year the sticker was orange. In this year, 2025, the sticker is pink. It's quite a vibrant pink, so it'll be very visible for obviously crews in terms of obviously identifying whether that subscription is valid. In terms of, I suppose, a secondary backup to that is the crews get on their in-cab units. Actually, those subscribing properties appear, so those residents without a subscription won't appear on the in-cab units. So the crews obviously have that information associated with the visual reminder through the sticker on the bin, just to try and minimise that risk of forgery. But it is something we try to protect against. If there are any stickers that are lost for any particular reason or damage, there is a different design on the sticker. So it'll appear as a pink and white chevron. So again, the crews will know if a replacement bin has been ordered or a replacement sticker is needed for any particular reason. Then again, that's clearly identifiable.
Very quick supplementary to that is the sort of attempt to stop fraud the main reason why subscriptions can't be rolling? Because I'm guessing there'd be a cost saving in for the council if we had an option for residents to not need to reapply every year. Is the main reason we're not doing that particular point, or is there another reason why?
No, I think it's fair to say that we've tried to introduce the scheme as effectively and as quickly as we possibly can. One of the working items that the project board is picking up at the moment is how will the scheme look in potentially 2026 onwards? Will it be the subscription scheme that we know now, or is there an option to move that to direct debit? So one of the things that we're very much looking at the moment are what are the costs, what are the benefits and disbenefits of potentially moving to a direct debit system for 2026, and that's something that obviously we'll keep the executive member and all members briefed on, but that is very much an item that's on the project agenda for Q2 of this year.
Right, thank you. On my list, I've got Councillor Hawke, Councillor Vassile and Councillor Jane Burton. Oh, that's okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Actually, this sort of follows up on what you've just been saying. So in the future, does it mean there's going to be more flexibility in the system so people can pay in instalments? Because at the moment, for some people, paying £50 nearly up front can really hurt in 1 week, whereas if it was spread throughout the year, it wouldn't be so painful. And there's also the question about people moving house or change of circumstances, because you've got to, people move in mid-year or move out, or you start the year as a keen gardener and composting and everything, and then something happens to you and you do your back in and you need the garden waste to be collected or whatever, or you lose your driving license so you can't take it to the tip or whatever. And then the other thing I was thinking, I was accosted by a neighbour of someone who said that the lady next door to her had Alzheimer's or some similar disease. It might not have been diagnosed. So she was putting her bin out every fortnight and it was full. And of course, no one was collecting because she didn't have the wherewithal to apply for the thing. And I just wondered if there could be feedback from the drivers to say, this bin keeps coming out. Does it need a bit of care follow-up rather than something like that? So, because otherwise, how do you catch people like that? Because however much you want to advertise and publicise and make it known, there's always some that slip through the net for whatever reason.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor. I think firstly on the direct debit scheme, I think in terms of that's one of the things that we'll have to assess is obviously the viability of the scheme. When we're talking about direct debits, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be split per month. Obviously the cost of administering direct debits is quite significant in itself, and if that was to be broken down to a greater granularity, it may not be affordable. I'm saying may not. That's something that obviously the project board will pick up as to whether or not that direct debit is a one-off charge. In relation to obviously those questions, and yeah, the crews will feed back those issues. But if we are aware of particular addresses, then that obviously then obviously have a word with myself and Ian afterwards, and we can pick that up. One of the things in relation to the subscription scheme is that it doesn't necessarily need to be the householder that subscribes, so it can be a family member or a friend on behalf of an elderly relative, for example, that can undertake that subscription. So for the subscription process, you have obviously the address at which you're paying for, but you can obviously pay for a license at a different address. So even if someone is paying for a relative who lives in York and they live outside, there's still the ability to do that, so we can handle as many subscriptions as we possibly can. But yeah, certainly in relation to the direct debit scheme, that's something that we'll review as part of that work that I've alluded to already.
Thank you. Councillor Vassile.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 basic questions. First of all, what's the projected cost of collecting garden waste scheme for 25-26? Or the administration, the collecting, and how many tonnes do you expect to collect? Is my first question.
In terms of collection costs, it's around about 1.85 million in terms of collection and disposal costs. So obviously that covers staff, vehicles, fuel, and disposal of the garden waste. In relation to, I suppose, the project costs, we've got a budget around about £200,000 for that. Obviously, we're looking to bring that spend within that kind of figure. And that's something that we will obviously keep under regular review. So, for example, Hayley Carricker, who's manager of the contact centre, is reviewing calls on a weekly basis in line with the additional staff that they've got to make sure that we are being as efficient as we possibly can be in terms of our administration of the scheme.
Thank you. So thank you for that. My second question is, what, and maybe it's in the report and I didn't see it, what's the total expected revenue from residents subscribing to the scheme for the year ahead, 25-26?
I mean, if we get a similar level of subscription to last year, so if we base it on that and make that assumption, and we get a similar level of sign up in relation to those residents that have claimed a discount and those that pay the full fee, then it would be around about 1.5 to 1.6 million pounds, dependent obviously upon that rate of subscription. But that's what we are envisaging that figure to be.
Thank you very much. And then to unpick just a little bit what you said in your first answer, I was just keen to understand how much City of York Council is paying per tonne to dispose of garden waste. And on the assumption that it's, I think your figures show that it was been 14,000 tonnes a year. And I'm assuming that's steady, but just if I'm wrong, you can tell me, but to get a sense of how much it costs per tonne to dispose of garden waste.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our disposal costs, I suppose it's broken down in two ways. There is a cost that we pay towards obviously the Your Waste facility per se, and there's obviously a gate fee that is charged for garden waste collection. So the gate fee in relation to disposal is £6 per tonne, but obviously there are obviously operating costs that we pay for, and that's split across residual waste, recycling waste, and garden waste. I don't have those figures to hand, but I'm more than happy to provide those to you outside of the meeting if that's something that you'd like to receive information on.
Okay, I mean, and just to close that, then I've seen figures from, say, Surrey, that say it costs them in total about £30 a tonne to dispose of their garden waste. With everything factored in, is that broadly comparable, or are you saying that we actually pay less?
I'll have to provide those figures in detail to you. What I would say is that it will vary dependent upon the area of the country. Also, it will vary dependent upon what the disposal method is. Obviously, in relation to ourselves, the disposal method is through windrow composting, but in some areas it's mixed with food waste, and it'll also depend on where the proximity of the facility is to wherever those collections are. So it will vary authority to authority, but I will come back to you separately on those figures because I don't want to give you erroneous information.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I allowed just a tiny extra one, Chair? The tiny extra one is to understand whether there's a revenue stream from all of this. It sounds like there's a discount from taking stuff to Your Waste and then it being composted. But is there a calculation as to how garden waste is used to either generate compost or energy from waste or whatever? Is that factored into thinking of all of this?
Yeah, as I say, I'll provide that information to you. I mean, what I would say in relation to the material is that the material is turned into a PAS 100 accredited compost, is bagged and then obviously sold on the household waste recycling centres at Towthorpe and Hazel Court. So I'll come back to you in detail with a breakdown of all of those costs.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ken.
Just a very quick follow-up. Ben will correct me if I'm wrong, but none of the garden waste collected as garden waste goes to energy from waste. It all goes to be made as 100 compost at Harewood Wynn. And also a quick plug, there is a giveaway day to anyone who wants, which Ben himself and Jodie done in the waste team stands and help shoveling in June, which is advertised, where you can go and get free compost for your garden as a sort of thank you. That's every year.
Duly noted. Okay, next I've got Councillor Jane Burton. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to comment actually, what a well-written report this is. It's really comprehensive, and it was great to see that, you know, the problems and how you resolved them, and the amount of hard work that went into it, and to advertise it to people. So that, you know, it was nice to read a report that was so comprehensive. So thank you for that. I just wondered how the crews have found the scheme in going out and enforcing it. It's not quite the right word, or just, you know, what is the word for this? I don't know what you'd call it, but carrying it out, I suppose. And how have they found also going back for the missed collections? I saw that, you know, people were reporting that more because they felt ownership of it. But those are my questions, really.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that when we launched the subscription scheme and we first, you know, come up with the project and we put that communicated that out to the crews, there was a bit of anxiety from the crews, the drivers, the loaders, that what would it mean for them? Would they get, you know, abuse? Would they get, you know, carry the sort of burden of quite right, they've been a massive part of rolling the project out. But they have been on board with everything we've done. We've communicated well with them from as a management and supervisory team, held many toolbox talks. We even did an internal sort of what we expect would be frequently asked questions for them to support them. Even toolbox talks on how to put the stickers on, when to put the stickers on, where to put them. Really, you know, made them include them in the whole project. So yeah, like I said, there was some anxiety around it, some concerns. You know, majority of them, of course, are residents of York as well. So they get it from that perspective. But no, they have been included in all the projects, and really only on the fact of what part they've had to play and how important of a part to play they've had. Yeah.
Good. And sorry, going back to the miscollections, have they had to do that sort of individually quite quickly, or have they waited till the following collection?
Yeah, so just really we haven't waited to the following collection. We've committed that we will, because it's a paid subscription, we will return for that missed bin as quickly as we can. Again, we spoke to them about that and why we'd have to do that. So we've supported them with that. Many times it's been the day or two after. That's really about making sure that we're making best use of our resources and efficiencies. So they understand that, they understand the reasons why we have to do that and behind that. And it's you know, in a lot of cases, or most cases, you know, the crews have helped each other out. So if they're in a particular area a certain day, you know, and another crew will return to get a missed collection for their buddy crew or their, you know, colleagues or whatever the scenario might be.
Thank you. Thanks.
Any supplementaries? Okay, I see you, Councillor Fenton. Just putting Councillor Melly to the bottom of the list. Well, last in the queue. Councillor Fenton, you have a supplementary. You're not that far down.
Just on miscollections, because I think I might have misunderstood the situation. So the policy that was approved in January of last year clearly stated there'll be no return for missed bins, and we kind of knew where we stood, and that's the advice that had been given to residents. From what you're saying, if a black bin is missed through no fault of the owner, there won't be a return. They'll have to wait till the next collection. But if it's a green bin and it's been missed, the crews will return prior to the next collection. So is that the policy? Because I didn't take that from the policy agreed last January, but I'll need to go back and reread it.
Yeah, no, that is a policy. In terms of residual waste, then we will take additional waste at the next collection. In relation to garden waste, obviously because it's a paid service and it's very difficult to obviously bag material up, and then obviously we don't take bags in with the garden waste, and then that's the reason for the differentiation, and that's updated within the waste policy, which is published online. In terms of that waste policy, then obviously we will undertake a review of that, and there is a periodic review of that policy actually and being undertaken at the moment, so that everyone's clear for the 2025 scheme, obviously in relation to garden waste, what our processes are, but right the way through for our waste policies. I think there's around about 30 pages in the policy, but it's all being reviewed and updated.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Just to supplement, I think it's because the waste policy was published in January, but then the decision made to introduce the scheme came after that. So it was in the FAQs about the scheme that they would return for missed green waste, but then the policy was updated. So the January one was updated at a later date. That's why it's a difference.
Thank you. Appreciate that clarification. Next, I've got Councillor Healy, then Councillor Melly.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is probably a question for Councillor Kent. My original question was going to be, was the aim of the charge to recover costs or generate a surplus? Reflecting on the answers that Ben gave to Councillor Vassy, for you to break even, this is just rough calculations, you're going to need to charge about £57.45p to get from 1.5 million to 1.85 million. So is the sort of short, medium-term goal to gradually bring income in line with costs?
So I think the main aim when we brought this in was to make savings, and we were currently paying, previously we were paying 1.87 million out of our budget to a service which only 2/3 of the city could access and was not a statutory service. So it was a way of recouping savings from that. So if you look at it from that perspective, if we hadn't done this, one alternative would have been to cut the service completely because it was non-statutory, which we didn't think was helpful, but we would have saved ourselves 1.87 million flat, I guess. But what we've done is save 1.6 at this stage. I think that will fluctuate because either more people will subscribe or we'll bring down the costs to reflect the actual take up. This year will give us a better idea of what the proper take up is, and also how many additional people who previously couldn't access it but want to, as we've discussed earlier, can. So I think we'll have a better idea at the end of this year, but the main aim was to make savings in council funds so we could support other services or not have to make cuts elsewhere. There isn't a projected, there is no information on projected saying we need to get to this cost to break even, because that's not where we started, and also we don't yet know what the final figures are. So there's no cost trajectory planned. And unless officers want to elaborate on that.
I think the only thing I'd say in addition to that, Councillor Healy, is that we will obviously try and keep all of our operational rounds under review. Obviously things change constantly with new housing developments coming on stream and so on and so forth. So right the way across recycling and refuse, we'll try to ensure that obviously our operational rounds are efficient as they can be. Obviously making sure that they are still deliverable and actually achievable for the crews as well. And we will follow that same process in relation to garden waste by obviously in 2025, I think it's fair to say that we'll have a more coherent idea as to how many residents are taking up that subscription, and then we can look at obviously the optimum rounds on the back of that as well, just to make sure that we are safe, reliable and efficient.
Thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start just by mentioning that I've got an interest, which is I've already declared it on my register of interests. I didn't redeclare at the start of the meeting because I wasn't expecting the conversation to go towards your waste. But since it's come up, just for transparency, I'll just mention that I am a company director of Your Waste. But I don't think it prohibits me from taking part in this discussion because we're not making any decisions and we're talking about council operations. But for transparency, I thought I'd mention it. It was already talked about earlier a little bit, but I represent Guildhall Ward, and well over 90% of residents in Guildhall Ward aren't eligible for green bin collections. So for 20 years now, we've had that inequality of residents in Guildhall Ward not having access to a service previously they were paying the same council tax as everyone else and not getting the service. And now that the subscription charges come in, they're still not they're not getting access to that service that tens of thousands of other people in the city have access to. I know that it's been a huge amount of work over the past year to get this up and running, and there's still a lot of work to do. You've already mentioned some of the changes, improvements you want to make, but I was just wondering whether rolling out this service more widely to the hundreds, if not thousands of residents who really would like to use this service, which would have better, more revenue for the council, better environmental outcomes, etc. Whether that can be a priority over the next year or so.
Yes, certainly so. I think it's probably worthwhile saying that as part of the work that we're going to be doing in relation to bags to bins, we'll obviously be briefing the relevant ward members, and there obviously are some changes in relation to Guildhall ward, so we'll do that. But I'll perhaps pick up a conversation outside with you if that's okay, and we can perhaps pick up some of those areas that you feel the service could be rolled out to, and we can incorporate that within our work plans for the year. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to echo Councillor Burton's comments about the report. So it's a very good report, sort of Ronseal report, does what it says on the tin in terms of all the information. So that was very good. Just a reminder that I think it was the last meeting, I asked the question about how difficult would life be if we combine green and grey bins and had everything one day. So I'd be interested in hearing something about that. If not now, it's all the calculations and what it would look like. Because personally, I think the city would be better if we had 1 in 14 days with bins strewn everywhere rather than 1 in 7. The comment I would make is just on, and I think probably Ben, in your sort of remarks, you were hinting that the press and radio advertising isn't the most lucrative. If it was me doing it, I would knock on the head the press and the radio, because I think CYC does the bins. People know they go to CYC for the bins, and I think we've effortlessly blown some money there on things, and I hope we can cancel that as soon as possible, because in the report it talks, for example, about 83% of people reading, 83% of adults reading the press, and that is very much a York press claim. It's ludicrous, the idea that 83% of adults in York are reading the press. I know they touch at various sort of tangential links about when they come up on it, similar thing with the radio. So I hope we can knock those on the head quite quickly. The question I was just going to ask very simply is, you talk in the report about how we said to people that you can share a bin with a neighbour, and Councillor Fenton's obviously said a thing about people in flats. Do you have any sort of feelings for how many just simple neighbours next door to each other might have just got together and shared a bin? Not several within a flat, but just 2 people, split the cost. Any view at all on that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that is very difficult to gauge, because what we've done as part of the subscription process is make it clear that if there are local arrangements between residents, it only needs to be one householder that's subscribing at one address, and then the bin is stored at that address. I think that's one of the things that we want to pick up as we develop the scheme in the future, whether that be obviously, as I say, in relation to perhaps a survey of a number of subscribers, or whether that's something that we look at through the subscription process for 2026. But I think that is an area where we need to get a greater understanding of exactly how many residents are taking that up. So it's a very, very fair point and question. In relation to the advertising costs, I think it's probably fair to say that I think we're duty bound to try to make sure that we've passed the messages out as effectively as we possibly can to ensure that all residents are aware of the fact that there have been changes. So I think we were keen to make sure that is very much reflected in what happened last year and obviously this year. As I've alluded to already, that is very much under review for the project in terms of what we do in relation to our ongoing communication, whether trying to push things through email means where we can, obviously using social media where we can, but obviously we have to recognise that there are a number of residents that don't engage with the council in that way, and we have had to try and get the message out as widely as we could in its infancy.
I'll just come to Councillor Kent first, and then.
No, sorry, mine's when everyone else has finished.
Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. I think I'm just sort of mindful. I think we've got so many ways we engage with residents for free, and then we've got the fallback of the oops sticker. So I think, and obviously Facebook costs us nothing, Twitter costs us nothing. So, and just related to that, obviously you talk in the report about the composting bins and the cost of those. Is peanuts, really, isn't it? In the scheme of things, that it's basically 200 odd at was it £12.50 or £15? So in other words, we're getting in what, £3,000 or something like that for the composting bin. So really small amounts. So potentially there's a way we can do something more with that. I appreciate we can't give them to everybody because then obviously most people wouldn't use them. But, you know, I'd potentially like to see a world where if people go to Hazel Court and collect them, you know, if they've taken the trouble to go there, you know, they're obviously going to be wanting to use it. And we could broaden that by quite a few hundred bins or, you know, a few thousand bins without a VAT cost to the council. So that's something we could look at and, you know, potentially have a saving for advertising that will come anyway.
I mean, I guess on the advertising, I actually think it's a very rare case of the council doing an half decent job of advertising something about its services. And I'd also throw in that it's probably been a healthy counterbalance to a lot of the green bin tax nonsense that's done the rounds. I mean, I get what you're saying about the press, etc., but if those mediums are filled with sort of campaign slogans and lines that are politically loaded, then if there's no council advertising at all, it's a one-way street. But I get what you mean about the total cost, and it sounds like comms costs will be coming down as the scheme beds in. So that there should be savings to come. Councillor Stewart?
But the advertising in the press was quite factual. You know, it wasn't sort of a rebuttal of negative stories. It wasn't something like saying the reason we're doing this is due to the bad Conservatives or something like that. You know, it was just quite accurate in terms of we're bringing a charge. This is how you subscribe.
And much better than nothing, I'd say. But yeah, you're right. Councillor Melly.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, there was a lot of fear mongering before this was introduced about increase in fly tipping, increase in traffic going to household waste recycling centres. And actually in this report, we've got actual statistics which show that none of that was true. None of that happened. And, you know, the council was bold enough to make quite a big change and try it and see what happened. And I think it's been really successful.
Yeah, I mean, I would say so far so good, but there's still time. I mean, trying to be balanced here. You can see what, you know, it's important that we don't get carried away, and I don't think anyone is getting carried away at the end of the table. Councillor Fenton.
I just kind of feed into the work as a scheme develops. Obviously, you know, the report sets out tonnages. There was a slight uptick in September, but it's been fairly steady. Household waste visits, I don't know whether that's you factored in the reduction in opening hours when calculating those figures. And I read it, and the question in my mind was, well, given the decrease in the number of or the fact that 40 people aren't subscribing, where's the waste going? It's not going in black bins, it's not going to the tip. Some of it will be composted. And there's probably kind of some anecdotal things that when you're looking at liaising with neighbourhood enforcement staff, for example, I see things. If I'm down by the railway line in Dringhouses, I see people chucking grass clippings over the fence onto these railway sidings. I didn't report that fly tipping, maybe I should have done. I just thought, that's rude. So do talk to councillors in terms of things we might see. Good examples of good practice of people who are, you know, have got some pallets and have set up a communal compost, you know, open air compost area. So there are things happening that, in my mind at least, might explain where some of it's going. But if you can talk to councillors as well in the course of your kind of internal information gathering, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, no, and thanks very much for the offer, councillor, and we'll certainly do that. I think it's fair to say in relation to the tonnages that you'll within, you know, kind of paragraph 50 of the report, you can really see the seasonal variation or year on year in terms of how the weather does impact upon tonnages. And I think obviously it's important that we continue the monitoring that we're doing, both in terms of tonnages that are collected at the curbside and obviously at the household waste recycling centres, just so we can try and build that picture over time, as we obviously understand how many people are subscribing to the scheme and then obviously what tonnages are coming forward. But obviously bearing in mind that does vary because of the weather, as you can see.
Councillor Kemp.
Yeah, this is speculation maybe, but I think we also ought to ask ourselves, given that, as Councillor Melly said, fly tipping was down, residual black bin tonnages is down, so people aren't putting it into their, or not in a statistically significant way into their black bins, some might. Number of complaints went down. Anecdotally, yes, there might be the odd incident where people are putting it in the railway sidings, whether or not that's environmentally a good thing to do is questionable. But I think we also ought to be a bit careful. I hear what you're saying, where's it all going? But that assumes that there was an extra, are you talking about the gap in current subscriptions and total households offered previously? Yeah, but that assumes that every single household that previously could access it for free filled its bin every fortnight. But actually the tonnages look pretty steady. So it's not, many households didn't use it every fortnight, didn't fill their bins, did share bins and are continuing to share bins. So maybe we're actually just seeing a reality of the number of households that were taking it up, because that's what's reflected in the tonnage, rather than that we're missing waste. Otherwise, it would show in a statistically significant way in one of these factors. And as for composting, we very much encourage composting. You know, it's really pleasing. It's only small, but it's significant. The number of compost bins sold at a discount at Hazel Court. I'd really like us to push that more, and community composting. And again, anecdotally, I have heard of people who are saying, well, it made me think, really, actually, the cheapest and the best thing I can do for the environment is compost. And we need to do all we can to encourage that, because that would be best for all of us.
Are there any official council like comm streams dealing with composting? Forgive my ignorance.
So on the email, the resident email update for anyone who signs up to the waste one, there's it's a standing item, how to compost, where you can get bins, and a how-to video. And we're going to look this year at about a designated sort of how to encourage people more as a separate item.
Thank you. Colleagues, we've spent nearly an hour on this. I think we've covered a lot of ground. This is normally the bit where we have recommendations. I did have one or two in mind, which officers are already on with, such as the ongoing subscription idea. But Councillor Merritt, you have your hand up.
I welcome those as one of the other Guildhall councillors, where we have been contacted by residents since we were elected in terms of trying to get on the garden waste system. There are a number of properties that do have quite sizable gardens that aren't, but even the small gardens, there is some smaller gardens, there is some degree of interest in getting on. So welcome the opportunity later in the year. Bring it on. But the wider thing I wanted to say is echo what Councillor Burton said earlier. Really clear report, really comprehensive report, and I think it's demonstrates just how much work went into the rollout of the new arrangements. And I really do think we must record our appreciation as a committee to everybody who was involved in that rollout and delivering it successfully. A lot of work was done. We are grateful.
Yep, I would echo that, Councillor Merritt, and I'd extend it, not to get too lovey-dovey, but the loaders that do the work on the ground, regardless of what colour the bin is, we've just come out of we're still in a pretty grim winter. Hats off to all of them for the work they put in. It's a really difficult job anyway. And I'm sure this change on the ground has made it probably slightly more challenging here and there. So yeah, I'd echo that. I guess perhaps stating the obvious, well, it's obvious to me, it'd be good to get an update again on this around this time next year, when we have more clarity on the numbers and where this is going post subscription. I think we'll know a lot more there. But yeah, again, would echo the quality of this report has been good too. So we can make sure that we capture that in the work plan to bring this forward. Blimey, January 2026. Yeah, but I'm not seeing any hands with other suggestions, so I'll wrap this item up here. Thank you all. We'll have a little refreshment break if that's all right, colleagues. So we come back here at 7:45. It's now 20 to 7. And then we'll resume business. Thanks. So welcome back to tonight's Economy, Place, Access and Transport Scrutiny Committee. We're on the next agenda item, which is looking at the neighbourhood caretakers sort of policy pledge from the administration. So it's an update report from officers and the executive member on the thinking around that, work so far, sort of early plans. As ever, the report is read, but if whoever wants to can give a summary, and welcome to James Gilchrist and Pauline Stutchfield, who are now at the table too. But if you can give a bit of an overview before we get into it, that would be grand.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. So I wasn't intending to present slide by slide, so I'm glad you've said that. But as you'll know, and as Councillor Taylor's just mentioned, there's a council plan commitment to develop a caretaker proposal to reflect pride in place priorities in neighbourhood plans. So that's the sort of broad concept. What I just wanted to stress is that no decisions have been made, and this is an opportunity for scrutiny to help develop the proposals before any formal proposal is made about what that caretaker proposal looks like. The presentation that's in the papers talks about the way public realm who undertake street cleansing and grounds maintenance currently operate, but also looks at the fact that neighbourhood caretakers as a concept are going to be much broader than just public realm. So what we've done is we've suggested a series of outcomes in that presentation that a neighbourhood caretaker proposal might want to achieve, and then how other services can become involved in making sure those outcomes are delivered. Then in response to those outcomes, there's a number of strands which officers are suggesting as a way forward in order to meet these outcomes. And they include things such as the ward walkabouts, neighbourhood caretaking groups, so that's tapping into the community capacity and volunteering that exists within the city and building upon that. There is a strand of work around ensuring staff report everything. So we know that staff are very good at reporting within their work stream. So Ben's team will report things up to him, but won't necessarily report things which are in another directorate. So we want to make sure we can maximise that cross-reporting so that the information the council holds is as good as possible. Linked to that is the next strand of thinking about how community safety and public protection can support a caretaker model, and looking at the way those services are delivered and how they can work more closely in terms of both those ward walkabouts and in terms of sort of dealing with the issues that are identified in those ward walkabout. And then the final few slides around how we matrix manage a neighbourhood caretaker model, recognising that it will be a cross-council concept. And that's complementary to the neighbourhood model, which executive approved in December, and Pauline led the work on that. So having sat and listened to the public speaker tonight, I think actually a lot of what was said can be addressed by what is in these papers today. So the ward walkabouts will address some of those issues that the speaker raised: delayed projects, highway issues. We do actually work with universities at the moment, but obviously this model is designed to respond to local issues, so we'd pick up those in a more specific way. And tapping into local issues and knowledge is outcome one. So I think there already is some positive work being done to try and meet what we're trying to achieve here. I think the key questions we wanted to ask scrutiny to think about is, are the outcomes that we've identified in those slides right? Given the limited resources that we have, how are the issues identified by each ward prioritised? So when a ward comes up with a list of things they would like to deal with, how is the prioritisation process applied? And with the additional resources being put into this, if they're approved, how do we ensure that they are deployed in a way that, well, I suppose there's a question of, do you deploy it in a way which improves equitable outcomes across the city, or do you do it in a way which allocates resource equitably? And that sort of challenge of how this model works is I think, going to be something which we probably have to evolve over time and come back to you with whenever we do have a model. It will probably need this committee's input into that model being refined as it moves forward.
Thank you. Anything else from officers or Councillor Kent? It's fine if not. Grant. Colleagues, any initial questions to open proceedings? So Councillor Hook first, then Councillor Healy, then Councillor Fenton. Sorry, make a note. Councillor Whitcroft. I'll do for now. Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the ideas. The thing that's bothered me most is the idea of the ward walkabouts, because I think that's a brilliant idea and you absolutely need to know the ward very well. When we did ward walkabouts 4 or 5 years ago for highways and things, they sort of allowed 2 hours. And so we barely tickled the ward when you've got a ward the size that I've got and a lot of other wards as well. So I'm hoping that the ward walkabouts are going to be allocated sufficient time to really know the ward if you don't actually live in it and you don't live and breathe it like I do.
Sure.
Come back. So I think the ward walkabouts that happened previously around an annual event that happened to try and put together an annual programme. And I think we don't see these in quite the same way. I think we see them as a more regular process. There is also, and I think we need to be realistic about what it'll achieve, but there is obviously additional resource going in to the model to try and make this happen as well, which will help. But I think they're an ongoing process rather than an annual process, the ward walkabouts.
Councillor Kemp.
I agree, Councillor Hook. It would be impossible to walk every ward. You know, you would spend all your time doing that. But I think also the thinking or the initial thinking around this was to say that whoever's doing the walkabout has some issues as council, as ward councillors, we know where the hotspots are or where things we want to do extra work is. And so it's sort of going and looking at those spaces. So maybe also a bit of sort of selection by ourselves in advance. So you're not walking the whole ward just to have a look at it. It's saying, do you know what, at the moment, this is what's been bothering us, or this is where residents will be most concerned, or this community project wants some help, or this playground, whatever. So it's being selective ourselves and directing the teams to it.
Yeah, which is what I did. It's just that the time taken to drive from Skelton to Askham Richard means that, you know, you're limited.
Yeah, you have a massive ward. Sorry, Councillor Healy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Quick question, and I'll add myself back on the list for later on. When you say equitably, in this context, what does that mean? Is it equitably by deprivation? Is it equitably by incidence? Is it equitably by population? It's just that we have lots of these services that some of the more, and I'm looking at Chris here, some of the more sort of prosperous, less incident related areas tend to sort of drop off the list.
I don't think we necessarily know. I think that's partly why it's one of the questions for Scrutiny Committee about how we come to that. So there are two ways of generally managing these sorts of services. You look at what you're putting in and make sure that's equitable across, or you look at the outcomes and try to achieve equitable outcomes across the piece. The complication here is that we're looking at a model that isn't all necessarily directly within our gift. So volunteer activity is a significant contributor to that pride in place and that sense of place. That varies massively from ward to ward. So actually, does the council need to recognise that? And in some places where there is quite a lot of activity, actually, do we want to build capacity in other places? And so it's trying to tease those issues out, I think, is what we're talking about. I don't know if you want to add anything to it.
Yeah, absolutely. The neighbourhood model that was approved in December is absolutely based on that ethos, is that where there's community capacity, we will seek to maximise that, working with the voluntary community sector and volunteers, and then focus our scarce council resources in those places where they need them. And I guess those areas where you haven't got the community capacity, or maybe where the community pride is not yet developed, and the outcome for me is to develop community pride across the city. Are those areas that are having the toughest time, where people haven't got the, you know, the time and the capacity because of the multiple issues that they might be dealing with to focus on, you know, helping support in keeping an area clean or volunteering. So we'd focus our services in those areas rather than trying to put a standard service within every single ward. So it's about using our resources more, if you like, based on the evidence, and we talked in the scrutiny, children's and community scrutiny, very much around being data-led and understanding our residents' needs from that perspective, as well as what we hear from residents themselves.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Healy. Next, Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Just a few kind of initial observations. I think there's nothing wrong with the kind of outcomes, but I think there's probably another way of presenting it from a resident's perspective in terms of what difference will they see as a result of this model, in terms of their ability to influence things or an improvement in the standard service they will see. For example, if you live in a CYC apartment and there are communal hedges, will they get cut so you can get out your gate? Just really simple things like that. I think where I would start from, I think recognising that the additional resource will not, will get you a certain way, but it's not going to pay for a huge army of staff. Is understanding what roles currently exists. Because we've got environment community officers, we've got community involvement officers, we've got neighbourhood enforcement officers, we've got estate workers. Understanding who's doing what, where they are, where the gaps are, where the vacancies are, and what the data tells us about sort of reports of reported complaints. And that'll give us part of the picture, because some people, in some areas there are lots of complaints, but that doesn't necessarily map to where the issues are that are in need of intervention. We all know that we get a disproportionate number of complaints that don't necessarily relate to the actual need. So I think there's a bit of kind of data work to, not to give you the answer because it won't, but it might inform, it might tell you, you know, where the gaps are, that perhaps where things aren't being reported. And just on kind of mapping and ward walkabouts, and it can be done in a number of ways, but I think mapping where volunteering is happening, mapping the areas that are managed by the council but could be managed in conjunction with a friends group or another group of active residents, one of whom we heard from this evening. So I think that mapping is going to be key, and that needs to be done early to inform interventions at a community level. Because, you know, whenever the council tries to impose something, invariably there'll be resistance, and we haven't got the resource or the energy to fight those battles on a street by street basis.
I think there is absolutely more of that we can do. We have some data now on, and we're improving that data all the time, both on what communities do and in terms of what the council does, but actually bringing that together, I'm not sure we do at the moment. So bringing that together in a single picture will be positive.
Councillor Kemp?
There's also an aspiration on the administration's part, or my part, I'd say, to say that it would be fantastic if going forward, as a result of the work that's done on this, that for each ward we have a sort of exactly that. You have a map of what the friends of groups are, where the volunteering capacity is, what the green spaces or the playgrounds are, an environmental sort of action plan, if you like, which would inform that and would also help you target where you want to work on this year. And that would also include things which I know I've previously discussed with Councillor Stewart, and the possibility for community tool stores. So instead of each individual person or resident or organisation having to get their own equipment, or for currently the environmental team, when someone arranges a litter pick or drives around the city and delivers it all, there's having stores where all these supplies are there, so you can increase that capacity without, you know, just increase that capacity, make it much easier for everybody without spending more. That's part of the ambition.
Councillor Vassy, was that a supplementary? Be honest. Yeah, get ahead in the queue. Okay. Well, I have a quick supplementary. Thanks, Councillor Vassie. It's on the mapping. I mean, you look at that slide that outlines the, if you like, the so-called neighbourhood areas. I mean, I would maintain that the word neighbourhood is really pushing it, I think. I mean, I'd like to think it wasn't beyond the realms for us to find a different word, because, I mean, look at East on page 71. I mean, that's not a neighbourhood. It's a massive chunk of the city. But yeah, on mapping, I think it would also help in any sort of visual aids that go out about this, be it to members, but particularly residents, perhaps when this starts to become a reality, that we're clear on which bits of the city aren't covered by this, or even the council at all. Because I imagine there's chunks of land that are just looked after by farmers, for example, which would significantly reduce what looks like a massive challenge when you look at that geography as it is on page 71. I mean, it'd be quite an intricate map, but I guess it's just a minor point, really. It still doesn't mean Councillor Hook's ward is going to be any less of a challenge to do a walkabout in, but it might just bring people up to speed with exactly what's being caught by this policy or model. Sorry, it's not a question. It's a statement. I'm really sorry.
No, well, if I can take it as a question and perhaps try to come back on it. I think part of the challenge is making sure that we, excuse me, pick up the issues at that fine detail level within wards, but then how you deploy a resource in an efficient way across a city and that area. And we are going to have to suck it and see a little bit, but also blend that. So picking up Councillor Hook's point, we're not going to do a walkabout in one of those massive areas, but actually when we come to deploying a physical team, we might deploy a physical team across somewhere bigger than a ward to make it efficient. And I think it's what we're going to have to work through is how we do that in a way that delivers the residents ultimately.
Thanks. Councillor Kent, were you wanting to come in then? Sorry, just looked eager. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just related to the outcomes, outcome 4 very much focuses on the resident-led side of things, and particularly around weed spraying opt-outs. Now, do correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is only one current weed spraying opt-out, and that's in Fishergate Ward. Is that the case? Oh, no, there are others. Oh, dear. But just wanted to sort of take examples. For example, the ward of Fishergate, where we do have very strong number of friends of groups, community groups, etc. Using those almost as case studies and examples, and then rolling them out to the rest of the city, or using what works there. But I also accept that currently they work in quite an autonomous way. Friends of Danesby Wood, for example, and we work with organisations like St Nick's as well. I just want to understand that, is this, or could a goal, I guess, or an outcome of this new scheme be to, rather than just provide focus on different areas of the city that have autonomous effective friends of groups, continuing to have sort of enhanced council support for them in areas where they might not be achieving as well as they want to, so that there aren't areas of the city that are just sort of left to community groups, if that makes sense. It needs to be done in tandem, rather than it just being assumed that one community group can take over the strain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that stresses the importance of the ward walkabouts and starting with communities, with ward councillors, so that actually it starts from the bottom up. And whilst a community may be saying, we want to take responsibility for this, we need a bit of help with this. And it's that sort of balancing up of that and creating a team that can respond in that way.
Yeah, I do appreciate that, and I'm glad that there will be a balance. But I just wanted to be clear that wards, just because they've got a good, effective community organisation, doesn't mean that they don't deserve help from the council in that instance as well. And I just want to be clear, because I could see an instance in which people see the myriad of groups we have in Fishergate and then potentially think less council support. That's not the solution. And also using those groups as an example as well. That's something I wanted to point out. I'm sure there are other wards that do things similar to Fishergate, probably not quite as well, but you know, we can't all be Fishergate.
Councillor Kent?
Sorry, I absolutely, but I also want to point out that I mean, I'm really pleased to be bringing this here, and it's really great to hear your views on it genuinely. But it's also really important to note that this is an additional resource that's being put in on top. So the current baseline, if you like, in whatever you want to call our current services, is happening and will continue to happen. And there's going to be 150,000, which isn't a fortune, but it's a significant amount of budget being, if it goes through, is being put towards it. Because we all want our communities to shine. We all want our places to look good. And this is about making York look, all the parts of York look as good as we want them to look. And it's an additionality. This is a really good thing. It's a bonus. It's an extra that we're putting in to achieve that aim.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Healy again.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll try and pose this as a question. Originally, when Neighbourhood Caretakers was a manifesto commitment before the election, I assumed it would be like a named individual, like you have your neighbourhood policeman or your neighbourhood PCSO. So it would be, you know, a number of individuals. £150,000 would pay for, I don't know, 4 individuals, for the sake of argument, which didn't seem like a great idea. I'm glad to see that what this is leading to, though, is trying to almost reimagine or just looking at what we have today and how we can do it better and just having some attention put to it. Because I'm guessing we probably have the similar model for this kind of service now for, I don't know, at least 5 years, if not a decade. So I commend that this has come back. Please don't feel just because you've called it Neighbourhood Caretakers and it's a manifesto commitment and you're looking to tick the box, that you satisfy that commitment and sort of lose all the other good stuff. So the question would be, does that seem, I don't know, there's
I mean, there's enough to work with there, isn't it?
I mean, I'm not sure I can answer a question, but I think what I would say is that in developing these proposals, what we've not just gone is there's 150k, what can we do with it? We've gone back to the basics of what the council does across the piece and gone, actually, who already contributes to this as a model and how do we get the most out of it by bringing it together in some sort of matrix managed way. So that sort of pooling of existing resource alongside some additional resource will hopefully maximise the benefit. And absolutely, that is the intention, to deliver it in that way.
What's the total spend in this area currently? So 150,000, we're talking what, 2% on the budget, 10% on the budget?
I couldn't, I'm nowhere I can do that maths in my head, I'm afraid. partly because it's because it covers so much. It covers bits of community, it covers bits of housing, it covers bits of public realm. So you could take it as part of the total council budget if you wanted and work it out, but there'd be a lot of zeros in there, I suspect.
I'll let you come back to us on it.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Healy. Next, I've got Councillor Vassey.
Thank you, Chair. I too welcome the report. I think it's a good thing that we rethink how we try to interact with the city and the residents. I think I'll focus my thoughts really on outcome 4. Though maybe I should also say I wish when these kind of plans were advanced, especially this kind of plan, there was a reference in the outcomes to creating a sustainable biodiverse city as one of those outcomes, because it's so easy for it to drop off the list. But outcome 4. So, Chair, you and I and a number of others have experienced the process of trying to get a transformation of the glyphosate regime across the city. And the ambition is clear in outcome 4 of wanting to work with residents. The key challenge I would say we faced over the past 3 years was the absence of effective GIS mapping. Over and over again, when we got down to the nitty-gritty and we tried to say a community group in Fishergate or the village of Elvington or, you know, places around the city want to opt out of glyphosating, what came back to us was we're not able to make that little change because we can't keep track of it and inform the spraying contractor that those 2 streets are not involved, that they've opted out. And so I just want to be clear that if we're going to engage with residents in the way that's sort of envisaged here, then it has to come with an ability to work with smaller groups of people, smaller communities, and that it shouldn't be about the city and the council's desire to cut the verge, but also be able to listen to what those groups are wanting to achieve so that they feel they're delivering something beyond simple the council's outcome. If the council's outcome is to keep the verge tidy, to keep the grass short, and the residents' view is, I want to do that, but I also want to see a sea of wildflowers. Getting this to work, I suspect, will only happen if both sides can see the outcome is delivering something they want. The only other thing I'd say at this point is, oh yes, rural grass cutting. There's mention in here about rural grass cutting. And I would again stress the value in us working with other organisations. I will declare an interest here. My youngest daughter works for Natural England. I'm aware that Natural England in Weldrake now have the flailing equipment and the baling equipment to cut rural verges and remove the arisings from the verge. I'm also aware that they're keen to work with other organisations, including the council, to have that equipment used through contracts around the city. They're more than happy to see the equipment being used. The challenge then is, what do you do with those collected arisings? I'm informed that we've got anaerobic digester near Melbourne, not far from the city. It's thinking through all those logical things. It's thinking how we work with the internal drainage board so that equipment is used by different organisations to cut the cost and to make sure that all the organisations know what each other is doing. Which again, you know, I remember I mentioned GIS mapping because I know I was at a meeting with the Internal Drainage Board last week. They have effective GIS mapping now for all the watercourses around York. Could we not combine with that? Are we thinking of doing that? Are we doing it? How do we improve the reach of our 150K by engaging the community better and by engaging those other organisations better? So a question is, you know, what are we doing in that regard? How have things changed since you and I, Chair, were struggling to get our voices heard on getting some wildflowers planted?
Thanks, Councillor Vassy.
So I think at the beginning, as Dylan Thomas would say, on outcome 4, absolutely, we can take that outcome away and look at that and making that broader around climate and sustainability. I think that's a fair challenge that we'll go away and look at. We do have GIS, so York Map that you all access is GIS. You're just not using the front end of the GIS system that feeds the web version. So the contractors had weed maps for at least 4 years, which the exclusion areas are on, which is how we make sure those generally don't get sprayed. The challenge with using a map like that is that an operative doesn't necessarily walk around identifying which grass. They become habit, they know they're around. So it remains a challenge in that terms. Ben, you might just want to talk a bit about the extra work. So if you go into and play on York Map, you'll see there is a growing amount of information in relation to public realm about grass cutting. And Ben's led a project to make that happen. I don't know if you want to talk about that. Thanks. Yeah, it's I think it's fair to say it's part of a kind of transitional arrangement. We're not necessarily where we want to be yet in relation to that. I think one of the things that we certainly reflected on in public realm is that we are probably quite, have been quite data poor, and it's something that we are looking at capturing. So Ian and others in the team have done a sterling piece of work capturing some of our information, which is on the background of York Map, and we are actively exploring the use of Alloy, which is a system that they have within highways, which maps all of the highway assets, and we're looking at rolling that out in relation to public realm. So that's very much a piece of work that's ongoing at the moment, and gathering some pace, which is great. The other thing, just like to reference, is that we have actually partnered up with Natural England. We actually used the cut and collect equipment through Craig Ralston at the back end of last year. So we tried it on 3 areas where we had outlined that we'd leave grass to grow longer. So that will be included in an update report that we're taking to Councillor Kent's decision session in March around various updates across public realm. But we used it. I think it worked successfully in one area and not so successfully in another. But we can provide those updates as part of that report, and then make sure you've got sight of that as well, Councillor.
That's great to hear. Can I respond, Chair?
You can, but can I just check, Councillor Melly, was yours a supplementary? Okay, yeah, carry on, Councillor Vassy, thank you.
So when I've met officers in my ward, they've repeatedly said to me, my instructions to what I do are just written on a sheet of A4. What I mean by GIS mapping, and maybe you mean the same, is something that can be amended in real time with an app. So the person who's going round can go, I've done that street. And then from that moment on, it's logged that street's been done. What I'm not meaning is a kind of vague, large map that you can put some patches on that tell people stuff, but something that's more proactive and interactive. I would very much welcome being able to see the system that we're operating if we could be given a link, because I think there's a huge win if we've got all of that right. So, yes.
I think there were 2 aspects to that. First of which is getting the data there and having that data spatially mapped, which is the GIS point. Only then can you build the system to sit over the top of it, which is the Alloy system that Ben talked about. So getting the data right in the first place is what needs to drive the system. And only then can you do highways will do it. I filled that pothole, to use the example. So the projects are running in that order, improving the data, getting that GIS mapped, and then the Alloy system will pull that data out of the GIS system and becomes the management tool. Sorry, Ben, I might stop you from there.
So can I ask, as a supplementary, this work regarding the Alloy system, assuming, we have a fair wind, which doesn't exist in council circles, when will we get to that point when the Alloy system is sort of serving the public realm function in the way that we're talking about? A year? Longer?
I don't think it'll be much less than a year, but a year is a good target for us to aim for. But there's a whole raft of issues that, like any project, that would be a good target.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Stewart and then Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah. So I'm coming at this very much from a viewpoint of lots of good positive intent and everything like that, but then far more of my sort of thoughts are about duplication and sort of structures that are going to come in and not really anything. So from a ward point of view in Cotland Thorpe, which I appreciate is totally unique in terms of it is a village, it's one ward member, which is therefore nowhere else in the city. What we'd most like to have is just a bit of extra money, because the problem is with Cotland Thorpe we know what needs to be done. So if you have a, walkabout, it's not really going to add anything because there's enough people seeing stuff and being aware of stuff, and parish councils doing stuff. But then it comes to a point where we want, something like a bit of road repairing or, an area improving. And then the city will say, we haven't got the funding, sort of for that. And I just sort of think, how much will this ultimately add and improve, Copmanthorpe? I think it's very difficult to sort of see it to a massive extent. I do appreciate Copmanthorpe is the most affluent ward and therefore is going to get pro rata less, you would think. And so that's the, the real sort of uncertainty I've got in terms of how it would work. I mean, things like, for example, it talks about community payback and how people can tap into that. But again, we know how community payback works. We've used it. We've got the Wombles who are volunteer litter pickers and everything like that. So, all of those sort of things are really well taken care of. So that's my sort of thought. I suppose the sort of related question is the fact that, what I think makes the villages and areas different is the parish councils already exist. And I think there's potentially a whole difference in how this sort of project can work across the city if an area has got a parish council compared to has not got a parish council. And I think that's almost a quite binary difference in terms of if it's a parish council in an area, if you go to that as your default working and say, we'd like to do this, we'd like to walk the streets with you, the parish council might say, well, that's nonsense because we can tell you all the problems to save you that sort of effort, or all these other things, or talk about, we'd like to help with community payback and say, well, we know all about that. Compared to if you don't have a parish council, then I think, obviously Councillor Whitcroft's talked about the groups like the Friends of, they're really, really important. But in terms of giving the initial structure and the initial starting point, I think so parish councils, it's almost like one project for them, I would think, and one project where we don't have parish councils in the city, if that makes some sort of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Stewart, any response from officers or Councillor Kent?
I mean, parish council is obviously going to have to be part of the model, and I think the way issues are identified is going to, I think we'll end up with 20 odd different models to a certain extent of how issues are identified. In parish councils, some will be literally pounding streets, others might be an exchange of emails to go, this is our priority at the moment. And I think we recognise that model is going to have to flex to meet, otherwise we won't be responding to the community. We need a model that communities want to engage with, and I mean communities in its broadest sense, rather than a model which we impose on communities and they then potentially disengage with.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? The more responsive it is to local need, the better. But I see what you mean. It could result in a lot of different versions of across the city, but a challenge worth meeting. Councillor Melly?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask about the purpose of the walkabouts and what objectives they might meet. We do regular walkabouts in my ward, and I'm sure lots of other people do them regularly in their wards, at a neighbourhood level, like a genuinely neighbourhood level, where there's 5 neighbourhoods in a ward rather than 5 wards in a neighbourhood, where we bring, residents, housing officers, maybe police, maybe highways, maybe local area coordinators, people together to walk around a neighbourhood and look at everything that needs doing and work together. I think it works quite well under the current model because sometimes it feels like the only way to get all the different departments and different agencies kind of working together. But under this new model, I'm not sure what the purpose of them would still be. If the idea of this new model, this neighbourhood model and neighbourhood caretakers, is that whoever's looking after the area knows the area and knows what needs doing, then why do they need a walkabout to tell them what needs doing? And if they're someone local and contactable, rather than having to go to a very senior manager who looks after the whole city, going to someone who is your local person and they're contactable anytime, then what's the point in waiting 6 months to walkabout? I kind of thought the point of this new model was that you don't have to go to someone who is, very, very senior, head of service, whatever, and then they pass it on to a more junior manager who then passes it on to a contractor or whatever, but it's someone who's actually there and knows what needs doing, and they're doing it because they know it needs doing, not because they've been told to as part of a roster or whatever. So I'm just wondering what the value of the walkabouts would be in terms of objectives that need meeting. Oh, sorry, and another bit, sorry to interrupt you, James. in response to a question earlier about the walkabouts, Councillor Kent, you were saying that you're not walking around the whole, the whole neighbourhood, you're maybe focusing on, maybe a residents group have said, oh, we want to, this area of grass, we want to change the mowing schedule, do some planting, whatever. So you might go there. And if there's another area of the ward or neighbourhood, we break that up. So does that mean if residents get in touch and say, we've got a project we want to do here, you go and do that on your walkabout, and then 2 weeks later, some other residents get in touch and say, oh, spring's coming up, I want to do some planting. You say, no, 6 months till your next walkabout, leave it till then? Or like, how does, I'm just struggling to understand how this walkabouts all kind of fit in with this new structure.
I think, I'm not sure the walkabouts as you have them necessarily do happen in the same way everywhere. I think there are places where we recognise as officers that it'd probably be helpful to have housing, police, community safety, public realm visit an estate and look at the issues and come together to agree who's got what powers and what resources to try and fix the problem. So we might be stealing your idea, I suppose, to a certain extent. So I don't think it's necessarily trying to replace that. I think what it's trying to do is make sure that we replicate what sounds like is happening in Guildhall across the city.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp.
Yes, I was going to say that. So thank you, James. But also in response to Councillor Healy saying he thought it would be a more personal contact with someone, I think in lots of areas of the city that I know, there isn't that personal contact with the people who are on the street who are doing it. It doesn't mean you'll have one named Bobby, but it means you get to know the team, so you'll know who your housing estate officer is. And apparently, if you're doing Guildhall, as James says, that works. But we're wanting to be sure that happens across the city, so you do know who the people are. So exactly that point, you don't have to go always to the senior manager in order to filter it down, and so that might mean once you've done a couple of walkabouts or you've met the people, apart from staff turnover, you know who they are and you can contact them via email or you can whatever. That's one point. The second point, it was really around prioritisation, because that was one of the questions in this for scrutiny, and it's both yours and Councillor Steward's point, which is clearly for a small team which is doing additional work on top and liaising with the existing services, you can't respond to everything every 2 months or every 2 weeks if a new group wants to do it. You can't say you'll have that team who are dedicated to it. So as ward members and as in conjunction with our residents, it's going to be about saying what's our priority for this year or for this 6 months. What do we want on top of, or what's the thing that actually is reported most which we think is not receiving quick enough attention. So there is going to have to be some prioritisation within the wards on that. Both within the wards and across the city, and that's something that I appreciate your feedback on.
I did have sorry, Pauline, were you going to say something then? Forgive me.
Thank you for spotting my facial expression, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think this is the important, just linking back to something the executive member said around environmental action plans, and some of that could be very short term, so things that can be done as a result of walkabout in the hours that follow or in the days that follow, but then maybe longer term plans that can be brought in. And it might be that the locality want to think about having a target number of volunteers. They haven't got many. They know that there's capacity in the community and they want to increase their numbers, especially on the run to winter if they're low on snow wardens, for example. So it's a range of things that I think the walkabouts can achieve, and also make sure if you've got a plan, then you can follow it up. You can revisit it and say, oh, that's not. We said we were going to do that last time. It's not being done. Why not? And what's the cause of that? So I think it's how you use that to sort of short-term and long-term plan. But some of the things, particularly in the areas where we know that there might be some ASB, there might be some window damage, and that could actually facilitate people thinking, well, I'm not, our area is getting worse. I'm not going to bother about it. But actually, if that window's repaired or those windows are repaired, then there's that sense of pride that actually something's getting done, we're going to look after it, and build that pride up going forward. So again, I think those walkabouts are really quite important, however they happen and whoever's involved with it. And it'll be different groups of people, I think, in different areas, especially if it's an area of a housing estate, for example, with our housing estate, there'll be different groups of people involved compared to other areas.
Thank you.
Chair.
Councillor Massey, I had a hand from you. I'll start to wrap up, so unless anyone's got anything burning, I have a question myself. Councillor Fenton. Go on, Councillor Massey.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I've been looking at the page 56 about external contracts, and note that there was the comment in there that recruiting seasonal staff has not worked. And that just left me thinking about other professions and other areas in terms of public realm, external, outside jobs and stuff like that, where in summer it's a given that staff are working, cutting vegetation, managing vegetation, and in winter they're working, maintaining footpaths, transforming roads, etc., etc. Is there an issue here about flexible staff, multi-skilling staff, and staff training that might impact on this idea about whether you can have people as in-house council teams or whether you have to contract? Are there opportunities, do you think, where it could be a question of providing more training so that people are doing one job in the summer and doing a different job in the winter, and then being permanent staff and not having to recruit all the time?
Start, but I might pass to Ben. So we don't recruit at the moment on a seasonal basis because it generally hasn't worked. Our public realm teams in the main are fairly multi-skilled, so there are some specialists, as you'd expect, and they will get tasked with particular jobs. So the danger operationally is if you send a team out and say you're multifunctional, you do everything, they might not actually get much beyond James Street before they turn around because it's the end of the day. So getting that balance right is really important. There is always more we can do in terms of that, but I think it is a balance to be struck. And an awful lot of the tasks fall at the same time of the year, of course, which is in the summer, which is part of how you smooth out that model. Now, some councils have looked at seasonal hours, whereby you work less hours in the winter and more in the summer, and you get paid an average rate across the year. The challenge with that, of course, is people start and leave, and it creates all sorts of complications in terms of pay and claim back and things. So yeah, it's something the industry wrestles with, but I think, Ben, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that it's certainly the approach we've taken in public realm is trying to multi-skill as much of our workforce as we possibly can. So we have, you know, a number of staff that are trained in various things from, you know, spraying to, you know, putting traffic management on, which you have to do obviously in terms of highways. We've got a number of staff that are trained in relation to, you know, hedge cutting, you know, ride on mowers, etc., etc. I think the reality is that it's impossible to train everybody within the team. So, you know, we've got, for example, 10 ride-on mowers that go across the city. So we make sure that we have 14 or 15 of our operatives trained to use them so that if someone was off sick or someone's on annual leave, we've got someone that can fall into that gap. But we could never resource training all 45 because if you don't use the equipment, you lose your expertise and your speed and therefore your efficiency, but also the fact that we have a limited number of machines. So we have to tailor and flex our resources as we possibly can. In terms of seasonal variation, the only seasonal staff we take on are those staff that offer the assisted garden scheme for particular housing tenants that don't have the ability to manage their gardens themselves. But the rest of the staff are employed throughout the year. And as you've already covered, and as James has said, we target those resources in different ways because of the different tasks that we need to do in the different seasons across the year. But I think in relation to this proposal, it's very much about how that can supplement and add on in relation to those areas. And I think it is going to be key about how we potentially look at skilling some of these teams so that we can actually make sure that they have a breadth of skill that can be used to undertake different tasks dependent upon what that community need is and where they're based at that particular time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just come back? Sorry, I was slightly flippant about saying to the staff, if you do everything, you won't get beyond James Street. I think what we're trying to do with this model is trying to have the best of both worlds. So a big chunk of the resource will continue to operate as it does now, being multifunctional across the city in as efficient a way as possible. And the caretaking team becomes that team that does do that fine detail attention within a locality. And it's trying to blend those two so you get a bit of both. And I think that's what this model is trying to do.
To respond just very quickly, Chair, and this is just my personal experience. As I say, my daughter has been through a process of being an apprentice at Natural England. As part and parcel of doing that, she can now drive a tractor, she operates train saws, she plants wildflowers, she digs fences, makes fences, a huge range of different skills that can just be applied at different times of the year. And that was really the thrust of my question, because I think it actually, from a staff point of view, it benefits the employee to be multi-skilled, to have different things, to be responsive and different challenges through the year. So that was really the thrust of what I was saying.
I completely agree, and I think we've tried to do that in the workplace to try and make that work varied, and it does become, obviously, I think teams are motivated by the challenge and by difference, and I think that's certainly what we're keen to do, in terms of our regular staff, but also through this model as well, is directing that and multi-skilling as many staff as we possibly can, so that when you look at last week, the more staff you have that have chainsaw licenses, for example, can unfortunately deal with all the trees that come down in the storms.
Thank you, Ben. I'll go to Councillor Fenton, then I'll finish from mine.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one in terms of, and I'm sure you'll have a list of what are the risks to delivery of a new model. I think availability and energy and enthusiasm amongst volunteers is something we shouldn't take for granted. I'm sure we don't, because I think it is. If we assume that's a given, then we're setting ourselves up to fail, and it feeds into the kind of the culture piece in this, in terms of how the council interacts with residents, and thinking what we can do as an organisation to make it more likely that residents will want to volunteer and engage with us. We've talked about adoptive urge. That's great, but don't put anything on it, otherwise you'll get a letter from the council saying, take that off the verge, even though you're trying to protect it from being used as a car parking space. So there's a bit we need to think about the sort of culture side of things, but we do need to think really long and hard about protecting the volunteers we have got, but how we go about recruiting new ones in a way that they won't be scared off by the prospect of lots of responsibility that they might not feel able to take on.
A lot of nods there, which I'm sure there's broad agreement, unless anyone wants to say anything back. No, okay, thank you. I wanted to talk about sort of measuring success, and obviously this isn't live yet, but what's your current thinking on how success will be measured for this? So obviously we have pre-existing means, we call it the talk about panel, where residents give views. We have very immediate stakeholders as ward members, parish councils, community groups. But one thing I'm hoping to hear is that we'll be looking at the reports that come in from residents about sort of public realm problems in their areas. So will those numbers go down? Will the time it takes for those reports to be resolved decrease? Obviously, the answer to those things is always hopefully. Can we get better at stopping reports from bouncing around from one team to another, which probably costs a hell of a lot of staff time in itself? What's the current thinking around how we're going to evaluate this once it's established?
I mean, we haven't written this or reviewed a set of KPIs to say this is what success looks like, other than those outcomes, some of which will be quite hard to measure, I suspect.
Yeah.
I think part of the challenge always is that as we engage more with communities, it's a conversation. So actually, sometimes what we do is we encourage more. So we make reporting easier. We get more reports, which is fine. That's the nature of the beast. So I don't think we necessarily always need to see these things that they must go down. Actually, what we need to do is look at actually what is the rationale, what is the reason for the things behind some of those numbers. So yeah, I think that's one we need to take away and think about.
Sorry, damaging the speaker. Just a couple of things to add to that, Chair. We talked about customer complaints and resident complaints earlier. I think that could be quite a tangible measure that we can measure down to ward level, can even measure down to street level. And I don't know if you're aware, but resident feedback and complaints is moving into customer services. So it's the real focus will be to drive down avoidable contact, and we can look at where that it's focused on street level services and service delivery. The other area of work where we're going to be measuring more closely is anything to do with housing and housing regulation. We're mandated to do that now by legislation, and the housing regulator will measure us on one resident engagement, which will be part of this, where we've got council residences, but how we involve them and design our systems and processes together. And this can be as much about the external environment as it is around the houses themselves, and any aspect of the housing work that we do, whether it's housing repairs or housing management, and any element of the process. We only conduct the tenant satisfaction questionnaire once a year. And what we want to do is measure more dynamically, the words out on the job. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's about the interactions with the housing management officer or whether it's an interaction with an electrician that's gone to do a repair. It's being able to feed back and for us to be able to respond to that. So we're going to have a set of measures that we can call upon that will give us a temperature check to see if this is working. But it'd be really good for Scrutiny to be involved in developing that scorecard, if you like, of measures that we can say come back every 6 months and say is it working or not. And are we measuring the right things as well?
Thank you for that. Yeah, which sort of brings me to, I guess, my final point really. Again, with a fair wind, when do you think we can sort of see this happening on the ground? Conscious coming up to 2 years now of the administration, current administration being in, could we say, because what I want to say is it'd be great to get an update on this in a year's time, but if I'm being truly honest, it would be a little bit more than a little bit disappointing if we get an update in a year's time and it's still effectively just an idea. In a year's time, hopefully we're looking at how it's landing on the ground for the first time. Any response in that regard?
Well, we need to take the feedback you've given us tonight and turn that into a decision session report, which to a certain extent is dependent on the budget next month. From that, then we would need to do the sort of HR change process. So realistically, you are probably talking about in a year's time, we should be able to tell you this is how the model has started to change and this is how it's starting to feel. So yeah, I think that's a realistic time frame to be able to see change. Whether residents have seen and felt it yet is probably a little bit longer, in all honesty, because but that would be my immediate reaction.
Yes.
Clearly, this is one element of work, that a really important element of how we're going to work together in localities. The wider neighbourhood model itself is going back in much more detail to executive in July. So again, hopefully there'll be a narrative around this that you can see in public. and how we're developing our services to respond to that. That's not just ourselves as the authority, but also health as well will be changing their services. So you'll see visible change happening over that period. It's when you'll start to see outcomes, I think, is going to be key.
Yeah. Thank you. Right, so we've been on this now for pretty much bang on an hour. Open to suggestions for recommendations. I mean, perhaps naively, I'm sort of getting the sense that officers and the executive member have taken on board a lot of what's been said. For instance, Councillor Vassie raising the point on a stronger commitment to biodiversity and sustainability. I didn't get any sense of challenge back on that. But then there's been the points raised around the need to think about how this is really going to work in areas that have your parishes or no parishes, but lots of active community groups, and the need for what you typing quickly, whatever this ends up looking like is going to need to be genuinely responsive in different parts of the city in different ways, but there'll always be a uniformity to some extent underneath that. I'm trying to capture the sort of main, they're not challenges, are they? They're sort of supplementary suggestions. We've talked about the KPIs. We'll get an update in a year's time, hopefully, that will have that information and the early signs of it coming to reality on the ground. Are there any other sort of particular points that members might want to specifically recommend beyond those? Oh, Councillor Merritt.
Just to sort of, I mean, one of the key discussions was around the GIS system and then the operating system on the top. And James, the director, basically said that it will probably be the best part of the year before they're there on it. Is there any scope for, in effect, accelerating a subset of it as a pilot? Or do you need the whole thing before you really can go?
Well, the data work will live forever because it's out of date the minute you put it on, so you need to go and keep it up to date. So that element of it will run forever to a certain extent, although will become less onerous. Potentially, the pilot may be an opportunity, so we might roll it out neighbourhood by neighbourhood, say. The only thing I'd say is once you've built it for, if the data's there, once you've built it for one, why wouldn't you just roll it out, I suppose? I'll take it away and consider whether that does doing a pilot accelerate it or not, I think is a fair challenge. I mean, I'd need to work with IT colleagues and the project team to think that through.
Thank you, Councillor Merritt and James. Councillor Vassie.
Just related to that, Chair, and as you say, to the earlier conversation, could members be circulated an example of you said alloy, was that right? That we can look at and familiarise ourselves with. Because part of the challenge for committees like this one is that we hear words and things being discussed and that they're a year away and never actually get to grips with what it is, what it does, how it works, so that the next time we sit down, we're all informed. So is it possible to get us a chance to look at it?
I think that's probably better as a show and tell, is my instinct, rather than an access, but we can arrange that for anyone who's interested. So we could run a session about how Ben could show you the GIS system and the data we started collecting, and we can get one of our highways colleagues or IT to show you how that system manages assets, which is in effect the Transport public realm.
That'd be great. Doesn't need an extra meeting, does it? You know, just something we can set up and members can join if they want to. Thanks, Councillor Vassie. I'll wrap up at this point. Thank you to officers for joining us and Councillor Kent. I hope this has been helpful. Lots of food for thought. Still lots to work through, but hopefully this will deliver improvements for residents. and we'll absolutely have it back, I'm assuming, in about a year's time. So yeah, thanks. I'll move on to the final item, which is the work plan. And on this item, I should apologise to colleagues. You'll have picked up as you arrived at the table what is a provisional work plan, much more populated than the one that's public. We'll get this on the meeting website so that residents can see what we're talking about right now. But I've populated the months to come with suggestions that I've had from committee members, pointers from executive members about things that are coming up, thoughts from officers. But I must stress it's extremely provisional in the sense that we need to work through when these items are best to come through, because sometimes you get more value if you can line it up with when officers are actually working on these things, or when they have the time to work on these things. If I've missed anything any of you have raised with me, we can work it in because it is genuinely provisional. Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in terms of items related to what's been suggested, I know that the public speaker talked about use of the access officer, or the role of the access officer in the planning process. May the 20th appears to be quite a planning heavy session. We've already got discussions around enforcement and section 106. If agreeable, as long as it doesn't fill up the agenda too much, it might be good to talk about the role of access in planning. In that point, we are the Economy Place Access and Transport Committee. I think it'd be good for us to talk a bit more about access and what it means in distinct transport.
Yeah, very good shout, Councillor Whitcroft. Happy to work that in and liaise with officers on doing that in the best possible way. I should add further to that, I have written to the York Disability Rights Forum to basically invite ideas. Obviously, access runs through almost everything that the committee touches on. It doesn't need to be access with a capital A, but I was sort of conscious that items that sit squarely under access we're probably short on. Obviously, they're volunteer-led, so there's no strict timelines, and this is a living document, but I'm sure we'll get more access-related suggestions from them too. But it's genuinely open, and I'm grateful for those colleagues who've chipped in too, and to Councillor Fenton, who frequently puts items my way that have come to him in his scrutiny chair role. But yeah, as this firms up and as it changes, members will be kept up to date. We'll get this on the public website in the coming weeks. I'm hoping it'll take better shape as we get clarity on timings. But I hope it's well, I won't use the word exciting, but I hope what we've got here is at least interesting for us to get stuck into as a scrutiny committee. I think it's exciting. I've got Councillor Fenton and yourself, James.
So just excuse me, a quick one, the 25th of March car parking item, if that could cover Res Park as well, given Councillor Whitcroft's motion to council about a review of the operation of the scheme. That might be a useful kind of pre-decision item to work into that.
That's a good shout. If we can make the timings work, it could be a long night, but that's what we're here for. James, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Stewart.
I need to check on this, because I'm not sure, but the way the gender pay gap item is written, I'm not sure it's a sort of, it feels like a corporate scrutiny item at the moment rather than a EPAT one if it's about the council. It's not my area of expertise in.
No, it's a fair point, and it's one that Robert, as Dem Services Officer, has also raised. I think the initial intention was for this to be a more of a citywide view, for the purpose of populating this provisional paper. Yeah, it's ended up being CYC focused.
Yeah,
we can broaden it out. I do think the broader it gets, the less tangible it'll get, because we can't really control other employers do across the city, but it still has absolute value. So yeah, your point is very much taken on board. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Yeah, the other item on that agenda is the assets community value. I was going to make the point, there's obviously various things about how to, you know, make something an asset of community value, how to promote, etc. In reality, they're all pretty meaningless, aren't they? Because it's a very low bar to get an ACV. The question we should be looking at there for me is, you know, how communities can actually, you know, do something with it more meaningfully. And obviously that is the last point in terms of community right to buy, you know, etc., and what that means for residents. Because I think ultimately, if we promote ACVs to a large degree, then people think, oh, great, it's an ACV, and so then it becomes that. You wait, put your offer in, and then, you know, the developer you didn't want pays £1 more, and the whole thing becomes totally meaningless. So for me, of those various bullet points, it's only the last one that tangibly is worth us looking at, but is worth looking at in a big way.
Yeah.
But that's the only one that really matters in that, because otherwise you can get anything made in ACV very easily. The second point I was going to make is we're very task group light. So obviously we've had one task group we've done, which was the excellent Dylan ride, which was officer time light. You know, great model that the word Councillor Fenton did a great job. And so I think we should do more of those. You know, very much so, because there has just been one in 2 years, I think, hasn't there, from this committee?
Yeah, and I mean, I'll respond to your latter point first. I mean, you're absolutely right. The trouble is, as you know, it's capacity. Members are all hard pressed, often working very hard in their own wards. I do think there is an increasing tendency for it to be trotted out that a task group would be really helpful. I'm not saying this is you. I'm suggesting it comes from other sources, and the people putting it out there often know that it'll be a very difficult challenge for a task group to be set up because they're so hard pressed as councillors. But it would still be good to have more task groups, and I'm sure if the right item comes along that galvanises sufficient interest, as Dylan Ride did, then we can get one going. So yeah, I mean, the door's always open, but it needs 3 members at least to really make it meaningful. And on the do you wanna come on that, back on that, Jane? Okay, yeah, well, my eye's been caught, so I've got you down. The first point about ACVs, I'd be inclined to agree. It's fairly toothless legislation, but it's not entirely useless, and it has helped in some areas. It'd be good to get more on the upcoming government plans for right to buy, and that might involve a guest speaker or some sort of round table, but that in itself might mean it gets knocked back later in the year. But if it means a more useful conversation or discussion, then I think that's a price worth paying. But yeah, I pretty much agree with the point you're making on that. I've had bitter experience with places in my own ward. Councillor Burton. Okay, microphone, please.
Sorry, getting late. The gender pay gap in February, I realise it's quite soon, so it might be too soon to do this, but it would be great to add in ethnicity and disability into the reporting. And also the car parking provision across the city. That would also be good to add in disabled parking into that if possible, without making it all about disabled parking, but to make it inclusive. And also to add that into parking enforcement, because that's an issue across the city again, with especially with delivery drivers and abuse of blue badge spaces across the town centre.
Thanks, Councillor Burton. I've got that. Nice one. Councillor Merritt, sorry.
It was also on the gender pay gap. I mean, I'm a trade union myself, and I know a lot of unions do have specialist negotiating staff who look at the gender pay issues. So whether we might be able to get a speaker that might have particular insights on that issue.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. Thank you, Councillor Merritt. Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, just very quickly, on the planning and development, service, I know it's more enforcement, but the point was made earlier, maybe by Councillor Merritt or Councillor Whitcroft, I'm not sure, about this whole thing about, oh, I can't remember, I don't know who it was anyway, the outline reserved matters, and you assume everything's going to be dealt with, or people assume everything's going to be dealt with that reserved matters, but once you've got outline, so on things like the access, how much scope is there for us as a council through the likes of scrutiny to put in place directives? I know they're related to the local plan and stuff like that, but that potentially is the way forward for what we could add, so the sort of rulings we could have as a city. It definitely frustrates me.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Stewart. Just scribbling that down, forgive me, colleagues. There's plenty that you've given me there in addition to what was already down. Getting the timing sorted out is always a challenge, but we'll make the best effort. But we'll get this online as well so the public can see. Is that sufficient for the time being? Of course, emails are always open. The Vice Chair and I had a good meeting about the work plan as well before Christmas, I should say. So he's had good input into what we see in front of us too. With that in mind, I'll move on from that item. I have no urgent business. The meeting is now over. Good night.
Thanks all.